Wait.
For Boris Johnson, this election is about one thing.
We are a party that is going to get Brexit done. By when? By January the 31st.
If you vote Conservative on Thursday, we can get Brexit done.
7 days to get Brexit done. 7 days to end the deadlock. We will get Brexit done. And we will end the acrimony and the chaos.
More than 3 years after British voters voted to leave the EU, they haven't. And Johnson's calculation is that voters still want Brexit and that a vote for him will break the deadlock in Parliament.
He was asked just the other day, what will you get your girlfriend for Christmas? He said, I'll get Brexit done. Completely clunking as a response, but it shows absolute relentless message discipline, which the focus groups suggest voters really are starting to notice, because when they are asked, can you summarise the central offer of the Conservatives? Well, they just want to get Brexit done, they would say. For Labour, it's harder.
Harder because Labour's leader Jeremy Corbyn is far less clear on Brexit. A long-time opponent of the EU, he's promising a second referendum on a better deal, but doesn't say how he will vote. His strategy has been to divert attention towards his socialist agenda of nationalisation and public spending, particularly on the country's revered health system.
Thanks, guys. Don't you want a government that actually values everybody in our society and doesn't pass by on the other side? And so we build on the great traditions of our movement, the movement that fought for the right to vote, that fought for a national insurance system, that fought for education, for council housing, for the right of women to vote, that to end racism and discrimination within our society.
In Scotland, the nationalist SNP is campaigning against Brexit and for independence from the UK. It's projected to do well.
But it's obviously been growing for a bit.
The Liberal Democrats are the one party that set out to simply cancel Brexit altogether, a promise that hasn't connected with voters.
One on each side.
Apart from Brexit, the focus has been on leadership and personality. Johnson versus Corbyn.
Right, off we go again then.
Both are divisive figures. For Johnson, there are questions of trust and character, and whether his Conservatives have moved too far towards populist nationalism. Corbyn's promises on public spending are popular, but on things like security he's not trusted and is seen by many as too extreme. His failure to deal with anti-Semitism at the heart of his party has damaged him. The polls have consistently given Johnson a lead, suggesting his Conservative Party should form some kind of majority. But undecided voters hold the key, and there is yet a distinct possibility of a hung parliament where no one party can govern alone. In that scenario, Jeremy Corbyn probably has a better chance of forming some kind of alliance with other parties. That would lead to a second referendum on Brexit. And while there is widespread mistrust of politics and politicians, many voters do realise this is a crucial vote. They just wish they had better choices. Simon McGregor-Wood, TRT World in Westminster.
Well, for more, Steve Keen joins us now from Amsterdam. He's an economist and honorary research fellow at the University College London. Welcome back to Money Talks, Steve. Now, as we know, going into this election, Boris Johnson really had the commanding lead, but we've seen Jeremy Corbyn manage to chip away at that lead. What did the Prime Minister do wrong along the way?
The answer could be called an election. That was what happened in May, of course, because she called the election in the belief that the Labor Party itself had stabbed Corbyn in the back so much that there was an enormous lead and she could cement a majority. Of course, she was a totally wooden campaigner. One thing I won't accuse Boris Johnson as being wooden. He has got a personality, but she so badly mishandled that election that she came up with a hung parliament. Now, Boris is hoping he can do alternative, but unlike May, he lacks the trust factor, and in terms of his own writing, he's got a history of being untrustworthy. So he's also being stabbed in the back by his own party. So it's one of these, the summary your correspondent made about choices nobody wants. That actually applies very strongly to both political parties. They're both led by people who, the actual parliamentarians themselves, would prefer to have somebody else in the lead. So it's a very, very difficult one to call.
And we've seen Jeremy Corbyn crisscross the country trying to prop up his very low popularity. Has he managed to do that?
I think he has. I mean, if you ever met Jeremy Corbyn and seen him in campaign in public, he connects extremely well with the public. He actually genuinely has empathy. He genuinely listens to people. And he can be a very stirring speaker in that environment. He's not somebody for the cut and thrust of question time, which is really a case of hurling insults at the other side. So when you put him in Parliament, and particularly when he's being reported on by the Parliamentary Press Corps, which is very strongly biased towards the Tories, from what I've seen in my time in the UK, he does very poorly. Put him on the hustings and he outdoes anybody, including Boris Johnson.
Interesting. Now, Boris Johnson, as we saw in Simon's package, has really tried to make this election all about Brexit, repeating his rally cry of getting Brexit done at any given moment, really. Is that what voters have wanted? Have they resonated with that message?
I don't think so. If you look at what actually caused the Brexit vote, fundamentally it was austerity. The Cameron government imposing austerity back in 2010 meant that a financial crisis was followed up by yet more pain for people who suffered from the crisis by unemployment. The only beneficiaries were the bankers, and guess who Boris Johnson said he's on the side of. So austerity created the mood that gave us Brexit. And the ironic thing is the person who was largely responsible for saying, don't punish the bankers, let's reward them instead, is now campaigning to win Brexit. It is a ludicrously bad mess. And austerity really is what this battle is over. In that sense, even though what Jeremy is doing is seen as a distraction, it's really saying let's get back to the social democratic welfare state we had before it was dismantled by the Conservatives between 2010 and 2017.
Now, some investors are getting increasingly worried at the prospect of a hung parliament. Do you think that's a realistic outcome here, or will one of the parties manage to get a majority?
It's quite likely it's going to be a hung parliament. The only question is how hung is which way does it hang? Does it hang left or right? And my guess is it may actually end up ending left because it's an optional first past the post system. It massively depends on how many people actually turn up and vote, and that's varying from different cohorts. The large level of registrations of youth may give a bias to the vote that the pollsters aren't taking into account, and it may end up being that the swing is more towards Labor Party Corbyn and restoring social democracy than it is towards Johnson and Brexit.
Okay, not long to go until we find out what the UK people decide. Steve Keen, always a pleasure. Thank you.